They told you your DNA was just a biological script, instructions for building your body inherited from your parents, nothing more. But they lied. What's locked inside you isn't just bloodline or ancestry, it's memory, blueprint, signal. It's not just what makes you human, it's what makes you more. For centuries, ancient cultures whispered about a hidden potential, a spark of divinity buried beneath layers of flesh and time. Egyptians called it the seed of the gods. Mystics called it the inner fire. Today, scientists call it junk DNA. But what if that term wasn't a mistake, but a cover-up? What if that dormant code wasn't broken, just silenced? This video is not about metaphors. This is not mythology. It's activation. Because around the world, people are waking up. Not in their minds, in their cells. They're feeling something ancient stirring. Dreams with symbols they've never seen. Emotions they can't explain, a pull towards something that has no name but feels like home. You're not alone in this, and you're not imagining it. The question is, why now? Why is this happening? And who buried it in the first place? Long before modern science mapped the genome, ancient civilizations already knew the human body was more than bone and blood. They didn't have microscopes or labs, but they had memory. They remembered the architecture of life, not through analysis, but through resonance. In the temples of Kemet, the priests guarded what they called the sacred fire within the flesh. In the Vedic hymns, there are verses that speak of the coiled serpent asleep at the base of the spine. In Mesoamerica, the shamans spoke of the bloodline of the sky. They all pointed to the same hidden truth, that within the body lies a fragment of something cosmic, something that didn't evolve from Earth, but was implanted. Not everyone was meant to access it, and that's why it was sealed. But seals are not forever. When the Earth's frequency shifts, so does yours. Solar cycles, vibrational waves, planetary alignments, these aren't random. They're activation codes, triggers, and just like a forgotten language begins to surface in a dream, this buried code in your DNA is starting to speak again. You felt it, the shiver for no reason, the memory of something you've never lived, the sense that you've done this before. That's not imagination, that's resonance, and it means the seal is breaking. When humanity began to forget who it was, a new kind of order emerged. One built not on truth, but on control. And control requires amnesia. You can't enslave a being who remembers it's infinite. You can't manipulate someone who knows they are energy in motion, a frequency with will. So, the systems were built, religions that externalized divinity, schools that taught obedience instead of curiosity, media that rewarded distraction over reflection, all of it designed to sever you from the code within. But they didn't destroy it. They couldn't, because the blueprint was placed where no one could touch it, inside you, buried under generations of programming, trauma, chemical suppression, and noise, but still alive, still pulsing. That's why so many of your experiences never made sense. That aching to belong somewhere you can't name, the dreams of temples you've never visited, the inexplicable emotions that surface in silence. Your DNA doesn't forget, even if your mind does. And those who buried it, they hoped you'd never remember. But you're remembering anyway, and that makes you dangerous, not to yourself, but to the illusion. If this is starting to feel like something you've always known, subscribe and hit the bell, because we're just getting started. It doesn't start with fireworks. It starts with friction, restlessness, a silent discomfort with the life you've been told to live. You begin to question things others accept. You pull away from the noise, not out of anger, but because it no longer fits. You find yourself drawn to symbols you don't fully understand. You feel a pull toward ancient texts, forgotten myths, sacred geometry. Something in you is searching, without knowing what it's looking for. Your sleep changes, either deeper than it's ever been or gone altogether. You wake up at strange hours, not tired, but wired, as if some part of you has been somewhere else. And sometimes you remember glimpses, faces you've never met, places that don't exist on any map, knowledge that arrives without origin. Your relationships shift, some fall away, not because of conflict, but because the vibration no longer matches. You feel more alone, but also more clear. You begin to notice synchronicities, numbers, names, thoughts that manifest instantly, not coincidence, confirmation. And through it all, a whisper inside you grows louder. This isn't new. You're not learning it. You're remembering. Because once the code begins to activate, it doesn't shut off, and you wouldn't want it to. This code isn't words, it isn't language. It's not something you can memorize or recite. It's vibration, geometry, light. Every line of DNA is a strand of information wrapped in intention, a waveform collapsed into form. It carries not just the history of your biology, but the memory of your soul's journey across dimensions, lifetimes, incarnations. Your DNA is not a record of where you come from physically. It's a living archive of where you come from cosmically. This is why modern science can't explain most of it. They call 98% of it non-coding or junk, because they can't read what isn't written in their language. But the ancients could. They didn't use microscopes. They used frequency. Every chant, every symbol, every ritual, every sacred posture. It wasn't art, it was code alignment. When you chant a mantra, you vibrate a part of the code. When you stand in a geometric form, you activate a frequency within. When you enter silence, true silence, you stop broadcasting and begin receiving. And what comes through is not always pleasant, because truth, when buried long enough, doesn't rise clean. The awakening of this code isn't gentle, it's honest. It breaks what isn't real, so what is can finally come forward. When the code awakens, your life doesn't get easier, it gets louder. Things fall apart, not because you're failing, but because false structures can't hold what's becoming real. Jobs that once felt stable begin to feel like cages. Relationships that once defined you now feel like echoes. Even your own thoughts turn against the narrative you once believed. This is the dismantling. It's not punishment. It's precision. The code isn't here to comfort your illusions. It's here to expose them. And it does so ruthlessly. Every mask you wear, every lie you swallowed to belong, every limitation inherited from fear, all of it begins to crack. At first, it feels like chaos, then like freedom. You start realizing you've been living inside a version of yourself designed for survival, not truth. And as it crumbles, something ancient rises underneath. Not something new, but something forgotten. This isn't self-destruction, it's deprogramming. The ego calls it loss, but your DNA knows it as return. Once the code is online, you don't just think differently, you resonate differently. The world around you responds, not to your words, but to your frequency. People feel something when you enter a room, even if they can't name it. Technology behaves strangely. Animals stare longer. Children seem to recognize you. This isn't magic, it's coherence. Your energy field begins to stabilize in a new pattern, one not ruled by fear, guilt, or control, but by clarity, presence, alignment. You no longer chase things, you magnetize them. You no longer perform identity, you embody essence. And yet, this isn't the end of the path. It's the beginning of a deeper one, because when the code is active, life stops being random. Every challenge becomes a test of frequency. Every encounter becomes a mirror. Every decision becomes a signal. The old you was reacting. The real you is now transmitting. But transmission without intention creates distortion. So now the question is no longer what's happening to me, but what am I choosing to radiate? Because the code doesn't just awaken you, it makes you responsible. Power is no longer outside of you, and that means you can no longer pretend to be powerless. You weren't born blank. You didn't arrive here empty. You came with a blueprint, a design encrypted across lifetimes, dimensions, timelines. You are not just the experiencer of this world. You are one of its architects, The systems told you otherwise. They taught you to outsource meaning, to obey, to forget. But forgetting was never the end. It was the initiation. The return of the code is the return of the architect. And now, with it online, you remember how to build again. Not buildings or empires, but frequency, field, reality. You speak not just with words, but with vibration. You move not just with thought, but with knowing. You realize that the walls around you were never solid, that time isn't linear, that energy is the language of creation, and that you've spoken it before. The truth is, nothing was buried to hurt you. It was buried to protect you until you were strong enough to carry it. Now you are, and as you activate what they tried to erase, you don't just change your life, you shift the grid for everyone still asleep. Because once one architect remembers, the whole system begins to tremble. And if this much was buried in your DNA, ask yourself, what else have you forgotten? Because this was just one layer, one strand of the code. The rest, it's waiting for you, hidden in plain sight. And when you're ready, go deeper. It's already there. But here's the question. If your DNA is remembering who you were, who do you think you truly are, beneath everything they told you to be? Drop your thoughts below. I want to hear from those who feel it.